"Sir, the amenities you're asking for are for first-class passengers only." The words hung in the air, dripping with condescension. Senior flight attendant Rebecca Thompson looked down at the black man in seat 2A, her smile thin and dismissive. The passenger was impeccably dressed, reviewing complex technical documents on a tablet, but all she saw was someone who didn't belong. She had no idea she was speaking to Marcus Wright, the brilliant founder and CEO of Horizon Systems, whose signature was the only thing standing between her airline and financial salvation. And he was about to pick up his pen. The single sentence, uttered with the chilling confidence of ingrained prejudice, was about to place a $3.5 billion contract on ice and send shockwaves through an entire airline. What began as a routine transatlantic flight would end with careers, shattered corporate policies rewritten, and a powerful reminder that in the interconnected world of global business, you never truly know who you're talking to. In the pressurized cabin of SkyGlobal's flagship Boeing 787 Dreamliner, flying at 39,000 feet somewhere over the Atlantic Ocean, the stage was set for a confrontation that would reverberate far beyond the confines of this aircraft. A confrontation between entrenched bias and quiet dignity, between unearned authority and earned respect. The contract that hung in the balance wasn't just another business deal. For SkyGlobal Airways, it represented the difference between a bright future and a slow, painful descent into obsolescence. For Marcus Wright, it was the culmination of years of innovation and hard work. In just minutes, the true cost of prejudice would begin to reveal itself, calculated not just in hurt feelings or wounded pride, but in billions of dollars and thousands of jobs. But Marcus Wright wasn't thinking about the magnitude of what was about to unfold. Not yet. For now, he was simply a passenger in seat 2A, experiencing the all-too-familiar sting of judgment, gathering data points in the methodical, analytical way that had made him one of the most successful tech entrepreneurs of his generation. The storm was coming, and Rebecca Thompson had just invited the lightning. Marcus Wright felt the gentle vibration of the Boeing 787 Dreamliner through the plush leather of seat 2A. For most travelers, a transatlantic flight was exhausting. For Marcus, it was a sanctuary of forced disconnection, a rare opportunity to think without interruption. The document displayed on his tablet was codenamed Project Eagle, a technological masterpiece designed to transform SkyGlobal Airways' entire operational infrastructure. This wasn't just software. It was a complete reimagining of how an airline functions. Project Eagle would revolutionize three critical areas. First, its predictive maintenance module would identify potential equipment failures before they occurred, reducing aircraft downtime by an estimated 63%. Second, its dynamic crew scheduling would optimize staff deployment using AI algorithms that accounted for everything from weather patterns to historical passenger behavior. Third, its customer experience platform would create seamless personalization across all touchpoints, from booking to baggage claim. The contract was worth $3.5 billion to Horizon Systems. But for SkyGlobal, it was oxygen, the difference between survival and slow suffocation in an increasingly competitive industry. Marcus hadn't been born into this world of billion-dollar deals. The son of a Baltimore factory worker and nurse, he'd earned scholarships to MIT, worked 3 jobs to graduate debt-free, and built Horizon Systems from a converted garage with 2 classmates. His first contract barely covered operating costs, but his innovative machine learning algorithms caught industry attention. 15 years later, he employed over 2,000 people and led a company valued at nearly $10 billion. Despite his success, Marcus remained grounded in the values his parents instilled: merit, integrity, and treating everyone with equal respect, regardless of position. He approached business with the methodical precision that characterized his coding, analyzing problems from multiple angles, anticipating failure points, and designing elegant solutions. At 42, Marcus had achieved more than most accomplish in a lifetime. Yet he'd never forgotten the countless moments of prejudice he'd encountered on his journey. The venture capitalist surprised when he, not his white co-founder, presented the technical pitch. The security guards who followed him in high-end stores. The random selections for additional screening at airports. These experiences had shaped him not into someone bitter or defensive, but into a leader determined to build systems, both technological and human, that operated on principles of fairness and logic, rather than bias and assumption. Now, as his plane cruised toward London and his date with corporate destiny, Marcus had no idea that he was about to face yet another test of his composure, dignity, and strategic thinking, one that would transform not just his day, but an entire corporate culture. At JFK's expansive Terminal 4, the check-in process had been seamless. The SkyGlobal agent, a pleasant young man named Miguel Sanchez, had greeted Marcus with a warm, genuine smile. "Welcome, Mr. Wright. We have you in seat 2A for today's flight to London Heathrow. It's a window seat just as you requested. Our celestial lounge is available for your use and will begin boarding in approximately 45 minutes. May I offer you a lounge pass?" It was professional, efficient, and respectful, exactly the standard Marcus expected. "Thank you, Miguel. I appreciate your assistance," Marcus replied, accepting the embossed lounge pass. The Celestial Lounge occupied the uppermost floor of Terminal 4, offering panoramic views of the airfield. Floor-to-ceiling windows allowed afternoon sunlight to bathe the space in a warm glow. The lounge was designed to create an atmosphere of understated luxury. Leather armchairs in muted earth tones, polished walnut tables, and strategic lighting that created private spaces without physical barriers. Marcus bypassed the well-stocked bar and gourmet buffet, making his way to a quiet corner overlooking the runways. He settled into a comfortable chair and opened his briefcase, extracting his tablet and a small notebook. While other travelers indulged in champagne and canapes, Marcus spent his time reviewing the final technical addendums to the contract, his mind a whirlwind of code, logistics, and legal clauses. He was meticulous by nature. Every detail mattered. A lounge attendant approached discreetly. "Mr. Wright, may I bring you something to drink?" "Sparkling water with lime, please," Marcus replied with a smile. "And perhaps an espresso." As he waited for his beverages, Marcus observed the rhythmic ballet of aircraft taking off and landing against the backdrop of the Manhattan skyline. There was something poetic about aviation, the marriage of complex engineering with human aspiration, the shrinking of vast distances through technology. It was this appreciation for elegant solutions to complex problems that had drawn him to the SkyGlobal contract in the first place. The attendant returned with his drinks on a small silver tray. "Your flight will begin boarding in 15 minutes, Mr. Wright. Would you like me to notify you when it's time?" "That won't be necessary, thank you. I'll keep track." When the announcement for SkyGlobal Flight 247 to London Heathrow echoed through the lounge, Marcus carefully packed his tablet into his sleek leather briefcase, straightened his suit jacket, and made his way to the gate. He was among the first to board, preferring to settle in before the cabin filled. At the gate, the boarding process was organized and efficient. A gate agent scanned his boarding pass with a professional nod. "Enjoy your flight, Mr. Wright." Marcus made his way down the jet bridge, wheeling his carry-on suitcase. At the aircraft door, he was greeted by David Ramirez, the purser for the flight. "Good afternoon, sir. Welcome aboard." "May I see your boarding pass?" David asked politely. Marcus handed it over with a friendly nod. "Ah, seat 2A. Right this way, Mr. Wright," David said, glancing at the pass and returning it. "Let me show you to your seat." The first-class cabin was arranged in a spacious 1-2-1 configuration, with each seat a private pod featuring direct aisle access. The cabin was designed in soothing shades of blue and gray with soft lighting that created an atmosphere of calm sophistication. David led Marcus to his seat. "Here you are, Mr. Wright. Seat 2A. Would you like assistance with stowing your luggage?" "I can manage, thank you," Marcus replied, lifting his carry-on into the overhead bin with ease. "Very good, sir. Once you're settled, I'll return with a pre-departure beverage. Would you prefer champagne orange juice or water? Sparkling water with a slice of lime would be perfect. Of course. And here's your amenity kit, David said, handing Marcus a leather pouch containing premium toiletries. I'll be right back with your water. Marcus settled into the spacious seat, arranging his personal items in the storage compartments. He placed his briefcase in the side console, his phone in the charging dock, and his tablet on the adjustable tray table. Everything had its place ordered and logical, just as he preferred his world to be. The other first-class passengers began to file in, mostly men, in similar business attire. A well-known actress in dark sunglasses, an elderly couple clearly embarking on a luxury vacation. Marcus nodded politely to those who caught his eye, then returned to preparing his workspace for the flight. David returned with a crystal glass of sparkling water complete with a wedge of lime and a linen cocktail napkin. Here you are, Mr. Wright. We'll be departing on schedule today. If there's anything else you need, please don't hesitate to ask. The service was so far exemplary, reinforcing Marcus's positive impression of SkyGlobal's frontline operations. It was a promising sign for the partnership ahead. He was looking forward to a productive flight, reviewing final contract details, enjoying a quality meal, perhaps a glass of single malt scotch, and then several hours of uninterrupted sleep before landing refreshed for his morning meeting. The flight to London was a key part of his carefully calibrated plan. Everything was proceeding according to schedule, each interaction professional and positive. Marcus had no reason to expect that this would change. He had no way of knowing that the tranquility of his journey was about to be shattered by a woman who saw not his accomplishments or his character, but only the color of his skin. Then came Rebecca Thompson. She moved through the first-class cabin with an air of proprietary ownership, as if she were the lady of the manor, inspecting the staff. Her blonde hair was pulled back into a tight bun, not a strand out of place. Her makeup was immaculate, her uniform pressed to perfection. She had been flying for SkyGlobal for over 20 years, a fact she often mentioned to both colleagues and passengers, and she believed her seniority gave her an almost supernatural ability to size people up in an instant. Rebecca had started her career when air travel still maintained some of its earlier glamour. She'd been hired in the late 90s when the industry was booming, and before the security paradigm shifts of the early 2000s. Over 2 decades, she had witnessed the gradual degradation of what she considered standards more diverse passengers, accessing premium cabins through points upgrades and corporate accounts rather than personal wealth. The relaxation of dress codes, the shift from experienced business travelers to a mix that included younger tech professionals who didn't fit her mental image of first-class passengers. She prided herself on being old school, a guardian of a disappearing era of civility and decorum. In practice, this meant she had developed rigid, often prejudiced ideas about who belonged in which cabin and how they should behave. Her mental categories were firmly established, rarely questioned, and rigidly enforced when she had the opportunity. Her eyes swept over the first-class passengers, making silent judgments with practiced efficiency. The actress in 4D received an effusive greeting, complete with offers of extra attention and privacy. Ms. Anderson, it's wonderful to have you with us again. Would you prefer to be addressed by name during the service, or would you like more anonymity on this trip? We can arrange for minimal interruptions if you'd like to rest. The elderly couple in 3A and 3B were treated with saccharine sweet condescension. Are we traveling to visit family today? Let me know if you need any assistance with your entertainment systems or seat controls. Sometimes these new gadgets can be a bit confusing. Her tone suggested she was speaking to children rather than adults, who had likely been traveling in premium cabins since before she was born. When her gaze landed on Marcus in 2A, it paused. He saw a flicker of something in her eyes. Confusion followed by a subtle tightening of her lips. The cognitive dissonance was evident in her expression. Here was a black man in an expertly tailored suit sitting confidently in one of the most expensive seats on the plane, reviewing complex technical documents on a high-end tablet. In Rebecca's rigid, prejudiced worldview, the pieces didn't fit. She bypassed him completely, attending to the passenger in 2C across the aisle. A middle-aged white man with thinning hair and an expensive watch before circling back. She stopped beside Marcus's seat, not with the open, welcoming posture she had shown to other passengers, but with a guarded stance, her arms crossed loosely over her chest. "Good afternoon," Marcus said, looking up from his tablet with a professional smile. "I'm in 2A. I can see that," she replied, her tone clipped. She glanced at his tablet, then at his face. "I'll need to see your boarding pass." It was a strange request. Marcus had already been seated for nearly 15 minutes. The gate agent had checked his boarding pass, as had David the purser, who had addressed him by name. But Marcus, ever a believer in de-escalation and professional courtesy, simply nodded. "Of course," he said, retrieving the pass from his jacket pocket and handing it to her. Rebecca took it and examined it under the cabin light for a fraction too long, as if searching for a forgery. She held it up, looked at the seat number 2A, and then looked at the seat itself, as if confirming it hadn't magically changed. "Is everything in order?" Marcus asked, his voice perfectly level. "For now," she said, handing the pass back without making eye contact. The implication hung in the air, thick and unpleasant. She then turned to the white man in the seat behind him, and her entire demeanor transformed instantly, like an actor changing character between scenes. "Mr. Harrison, so good to see you again." The usual Glenlivet. 18 after takeoff. Her voice had risen half an octave, infused with warmth and familiarity. "You know me too well, Rebecca." The man laughed. 20 years of service, Mr. Harrison. I remember what my regular's like." She tapped the side of her head with a knowing smile. "It's all up here." Marcus took a slow, deep breath, letting the insult wash over him without reacting. He'd faced this his entire life, the surprise in the eyes of venture capitalists when he, not his white co-founder, turned out to be the lead engineer. The security guards who tailed him in high-end stores. The random selection for additional screening at airports. It was a tax he paid for being black and successful in a world that still struggled to reconcile the two. Usually, he ignored it. It was background noise, an unfortunate but predictable part of navigating certain spaces. But there was something particularly grating about Rebecca's performance. It was overt personal and profoundly unprofessional. Sitting across the aisle in seat 2D was Dr. Emily Parker, a sociology professor from Columbia University, specializing in organizational behavior and workplace bias. She had her notebook out, intending to jot down thoughts for an upcoming paper on social dynamics in confined spaces. Now she had a real-world case study unfolding right in front of her. She watched the exchange, her academic mind dissecting every nuance, the targeted verification, the dismissive tone, the immediate and contrasting warmth shown to the white passenger. It was a textbook example of implicit bias manifesting in differential treatment. She made a small note. F.A. Thompson, overt suspicion toward PAX 2A, black male, versus immediate familiarity with PAX 3A, white male. She had no idea how important her notes would become. Marcus tried to put the incident out of his mind. He was a CEO responsible for thousands of employees and billions in contracts. He wasn't going to let one ignorant flight attendant derail his focus or spoil his journey. He returned to Project Eagle, immersing himself in the elegant complexity of his company's creation. But the chill from the encounter lingered. The air in his little bubble of luxury had been poisoned, and the flight had barely begun. Once the plane reached cruising altitude, and the seatbelt sign pinged off, the cabin crew began preparing for the meal service. It was a well-orchestrated affair, a performance of luxury at 39,000 feet. David Ramirez, the purser, came by with a wine list and menu, addressing Marcus with the same professional warmth as before. "Mr. Wright, our dinner service will begin shortly. Can I interest you in an aperitif? We have an excellent Sancerre that pairs beautifully with the seared scallop appetizer." "That sounds perfect, David." "Thank you," Marcus said, grateful for the return to normality. But as David moved away, Rebecca took over their section of the cabin. She moved with deliberate slowness, first laying out crisp white linens and polished silverware for the other passengers. Marcus watched as she took the meal order for the man in 2C, then the couple in row 3, laughing and chatting with them. She physically bypassed Marcus's seat walking past him to serve row 4. It was a move so blatant, so intentionally insulting, that it could not be misinterpreted as an accident. Marcus remained silent, his face a mask of calm neutrality. He refused to give her the satisfaction of a reaction. He simply waited. Internally, however, a cold anger was beginning to build. This was no longer about unconscious bias or momentary rudeness. This was a deliberate campaign of disrespect. Under his composed exterior, Marcus felt a familiar tightening in his chest, a sensation he'd experienced many times before when confronted with prejudice. It was a mixture of weariness, indignation, and calculation. Part of him wanted to confront her immediately, to call out her behavior for what it was. But the strategic thinker in him, the CEO who navigated complex human systems every day, recognized this as a moment to gather data, not to react. This is not just about me, he thought. This is about a broken culture that allows this behavior to flourish. And I may be in a unique position to address it. Finally, after every other passenger in the forward cabin had been attended to, Rebecca stopped at his seat. She didn't have her notepad out. "What do you want?" she asked, the words stripped of any pretense of service. Marcus looked at the menu David had left. "I'll start with the seared scallops, and for the main course, I believe I'll have the filet mignon medium rare." Rebecca scoffed a small, ugly sound. "We're already out of the filet. It's very popular. You can have the chicken or the pasta." Marcus knew this was almost certainly a lie. He had been one of the first to board, and it was standard procedure for flight attendants to take meal orders from front to back. To be out of the most popular dish by the time she reached the second row was statistically improbable. He looked her directly in the eye. "You're out of the filet. That's unfortunate. In that case, I'll have the chicken." His voice was steady, betraying no emotion. He would not engage. He would not argue. He would simply observe and document. Across the aisle, Dr. Parker, who had just been served her own medium-rare filet mignon, nearly choked on her water. She knew for a fact the dish was available. She watched, fascinated and appalled, as Rebecca walked away without another word. 15 minutes later, Rebecca brought Marcus's meal. While other passengers' trays were placed with care, his was set down with a clatter that was just a little too loud. The appetizer portion seemed noticeably smaller than those served to other passengers. His bread roll was slightly crushed. Throughout the meal, the insults continued small, but accumulating like 1,000 paper cuts. His water glass remained empty while others were refilled. When he used the call button to request a glass of the Macallan 18 Scotch he had been looking forward to, Rebecca returned with a lesser brand. "The Macallan is for our global premier members," she said with a smug smile. Marcus knew for a fact that his ticket booked through his corporate account was the highest tier available. He was a global premier member with over 250,000 miles accumulated in the past year alone. He decided to test her. "Could you double-check that my account is tied to my frequent flyer number?" She waved a dismissive hand. "The manifest says what it says. It's the Johnny Walker or nothing." "The Johnny Walker is fine," Marcus said quietly. Each incident was a small log thrown onto a smoldering fire. Marcus remained placid on the surface, but inside his mind was working with the cold precision of a computer algorithm. He wasn't just a passenger anymore. He was the CEO of a technology company that had a $3.5 billion contract on the line with this airline's parent company, a contract predicated on efficiency, service, and flawless execution. And he was currently experiencing a complete and utter failure in customer relations. He started making mental notes, time-stamping each slight, each lie, each moment of disrespect. The data points were adding up, and the conclusion they were leading to was damning. Dr. Parker continued her observation, now fully engrossed in what was unfolding. Her academic interest had transformed into moral outrage, but she maintained her detached documentation, knowing it might be needed. She noted each interaction, each discrepancy in service. She observed David Ramirez's increasing discomfort as he noticed what was happening, but failed to intervene. The businessman in 2C, a marketing executive named Richard Bennett, also began to notice the disparate treatment. He caught Marcus's eye at one point and gave a small apologetic shrug, as if to say, "I see what's happening and I'm sorry." But he too said nothing. A flight attendant named Maria Gonzalez, working in business class, but occasionally helping in first, also noticed Rebecca's behavior. She exchanged concerned glances with David, but neither confronted their senior colleague. The calculated indignities continued through the meal service and into the mid-flight period. Rebecca's behavior was becoming increasingly brazen, as if Marcus's continued composure was somehow provoking her, rather than diffusing the situation. It was a masterclass in microaggressions, each incident small enough to be dismissed individually, yet collectively forming an unmistakable pattern of targeted disrespect. And with each incident, the likelihood of Marcus Wright signing that $3.5 billion contract was diminishing, though Rebecca remained blissfully unaware of who she was antagonizing. The calm before the storm was about to end. The most egregious moment was yet to come, and when it did, the professional composure that Marcus had maintained would be tested as never before. As the cabin lights dimmed for the mid-flight rest period, Marcus tried to focus on his work, but found his concentration repeatedly broken. The accumulation of slights had created a persistent distraction, an ambient awareness of hostility, that made the private sanctuary of his first-class pod feel more like contested territory. He switched from reviewing technical specifications to drafting an email to his executive team, updating them on his travel status and preparation for the morning meeting. The familiar task helped restore some sense of normalcy, reconnecting him to his role as CEO, rather than his current experience as a targeted passenger. Marcus was working on his tablet when he reached for his glass of water. As Rebecca passed by in the aisle, her hip jostled his arm. Not accidentally, he was certain given the width of the aisle and her awareness of his extended arm. The glass tipped over, spilling ice-cold water all over his trousers and the corner of his leather briefcase on the floor. "Oh, for heaven's sake," Rebecca snapped, not at her own clumsiness but at him. "You need to be more careful with where you put your things." She made a cursory, impatient dab at the puddle with a single napkin, and then walked off, leaving him to deal with the mess. There was no apology, no offer of more napkins or a blanket to cover his soaked trousers. There was only blame. That was the moment the equation in Marcus's mind shifted. This was no longer just about personal disrespect. This was a liability. Rebecca's behavior was a walking, talking representation of a brand that was fundamentally broken. And his company, Horizon Systems, was about to tie its pristine reputation to that broken brand. The risk analysis was no longer favorable. The sanctuary of the sky had become a hostile environment, and the cost of Rebecca Thompson's prejudice was about to be calculated in billions. Like a pilot navigating through unexpected turbulence, Marcus adjusted his mental flight path. The cold water seeping through his expensive trousers was a physical reminder of the invisible barriers he still faced, no matter how high he had climbed in his career. But unlike the water, which would eventually dry, the impact of his response to this situation would leave a lasting impression. David Ramirez noticed the commotion and hurried over. "Mr. Wright, I'm so sorry about that. Let me get you some more napkins and a blanket." His concern seemed genuine, but his intervention was too little too late. Where had this supervisory attention been during the earlier incidents? "Thank you, David," Marcus said, his voice deliberately neutral. Dr. Parker watched the interaction with increasing concern. The spill had been visible from her seat, and the flight attendant's response, or lack thereof, was shockingly unprofessional. She made another detailed note in her book, including the time and Rebecca's exact words. Richard Bennett in 2C also witnessed the incident. "That was completely uncalled for," he said to Marcus. "Would you like my spare napkins?" "I appreciate that." "Thank you," Marcus replied, accepting the offered napkins with dignity. David returned with a stack of cloth napkins and a light blanket. Again, I'm very sorry about this, Mr. Wright. Can I bring you a fresh drink? Perhaps something stronger than water. His nervous smile suggested he knew things were spiraling out of control. Just water is fine, thank you, Marcus said. And perhaps another Johnny Walker. As David hurried away, Marcus used the napkins to dry his trousers as best he could. The water had soaked through to his skin, an uncomfortable reminder of the incident that would last for hours. He checked his briefcase. Thankfully, the leather had repelled most of the water, and the contents were unharmed. When David returned with the drinks, he placed them carefully on Marcus's tray table, ensuring they were well away from the edge. Is there anything else I can do for you, sir? No, thank you, David. I'm fine. Marcus's tone was polite but distant. The time for service recovery had long passed. Hours bled into one another. Despite his damp trousers and the simmering indignation, Marcus continued to work. He was a professional. He would not be derailed. As the flight progressed, Rebecca's behavior showed no signs of improvement. When she distributed hot towels for refreshment, everyone received theirs with silver tongs. Marcus's was dropped unceremoniously on his tray. When she offered magazines, she skipped his seat entirely. The pattern was now abundantly clear to anyone paying attention, and several passengers were indeed watching with increasing discomfort. The elderly couple in row 3 exchanged concerned glances. The actress in 4D, who had been observing discreetly behind her sunglasses, frowned in disapproval. Maria Gonzalez. The other flight attendant tried to compensate by offering Marcus extra attention when she could, but her efforts only highlighted Rebecca's behavior by contrast. For Marcus, each new slight was another data point, another piece of evidence in the case that was building in his mind. He had long ago stopped expecting fair treatment from Rebecca. Now he was documenting, analyzing, evaluating the structural failures that allowed such behavior to flourish. Rebecca remained oblivious to the gathering storm. In her mind, she was simply maintaining standards, putting someone in their place who didn't belong in her carefully ordered world. She couldn't see that she was standing at the edge of a precipice of her own making, about to step into the void. As the flight began its initial descent toward London, the crew started preparing the cabin for landing. Marcus decided he needed one more item to complete his assessment. It was a final test of the system. He pressed the call button. A few moments later, Rebecca appeared, her expression one of utter annoyance. "The seatbelt sign is on," she said, her voice sharp. "We're landing." "I'm aware," Marcus replied calmly. "I just have a quick question. I saw on the menu that you offer a premium amenity kit from the brand Aveline for first-class passengers. I didn't receive one earlier. Could I get one before we land?" It was a simple standard request. The Aveline kits with their high-end moisturizers, lip balms, and facial mists were a signature perk of the SkyGlobal International first-class experience, prominently featured in their marketing materials. Rebecca's face, already a mask of contempt, hardened into something uglier. She looked at him, then let her eyes drift around the cabin as if to draw an audience. Several passengers, including Dr. Parker and Richard Bennett, were now overtly watching the drama unfold. What happened next would cross a line that could never be uncrossed, setting in motion events that would reverberate throughout the airline and beyond. Sir Rebecca began, her voice dripping with a syrupy, condescending poison that she clearly mistook for authority. "I don't know what part of this you're not understanding." She leaned in slightly, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial hiss that was somehow more insulting than a shout. "Those little black bags with the fancy lotions, they are for first-class passengers." She paused for dramatic effect, letting the words hang in the air before delivering the final fatal blow. "The amenities you're asking for are for first class only. Your ticket, whatever kind of upgrade you manage to get, it clearly doesn't include the full service. Maybe you should stick to what's offered in economy." The word economy echoed in the quiet cabin like a thunderclap in clear skies. It was the ultimate insult of verbal demotion delivered with smug satisfaction. She had finally said the quiet part out loud. "You don't belong here." Marcus felt the words hit him like a physical blow. In that moment, something crystallized within him, Not just anger, though that was certainly present, but a profound clarity about what was happening and what needed to be done. The calculated CEO and the man who had battled prejudice his entire life merged into a singular purpose. His face remained impassive, but his eyes hardened into obsidian determination. This ends today, he thought. Not just for me, but for everyone who comes after me. A collective gasp went through the nearby seats. Richard Bennett in 2C looked shocked. The elderly couple in row 3 looked deeply uncomfortable. Before Marcus could even formulate a response, a clear, authoritative voice cut through the tension from across the aisle. That is an outrageous and patently false statement. Dr. Emily Parker said, her eyes flashing with academic fury. She had unbuckled her seatbelt and was half standing in her pod. I am sitting right here, and I can personally attest that this man has been subjected to your unprofessional and discriminatory behavior for this entire flight. You lied about the availability of the filet mignon. You have ignored his requests for service, and now you are publicly humiliating him with baseless accusations about his ticket class. Your conduct is a disgrace to this airline. Rebecca whirled around, her face pale with shock and anger. Ma'am, this is a private matter between a crew member and a passenger. I must ask you to sit down and fasten your seatbelt. It stopped being a private matter when you decided to project your bigotry across the entire cabin. Dr. Parker retorted, holding up her small notebook. And for the record, I have been documenting every single microaggression and service failure for the last 7 hours. I am a professor of sociology at Columbia University, and I would be more than happy to provide my expert testimony in any official complaint. The situation had now completely imploded. David Ramirez rushed forward, his face panicked. Rebecca, what's going on here? This passenger, Rebecca spat, pointing a trembling finger at Marcus, is being disruptive and making unreasonable demands. Marcus finally spoke, his voice low and steady, yet it cut through the chaos with the sharpness of a diamond. David, he said, not even looking at Rebecca. The only unreasonable thing here is the assumption that my skin color dictates my seat assignment. I paid for seat 2A. I expect the service that comes with it. Instead, I have been treated like a stowaway. The commotion had attracted the attention of the cockpit. The door opened, and Captain Alejandro Rodriguez, a veteran pilot with silvering hair and a no-nonsense demeanor, emerged. What is the problem here? He demanded, his eyes surveying the scene. Rebecca immediately tried to win him over. Captain, this passenger is refusing to follow instructions and is agitating others. But Captain Rodriguez's eyes were on Marcus, who sat calmly amidst the storm he had not created, but was now forced to navigate. He saw the expensive suit, the intelligent eyes, the utter lack of panic. Then he looked at Dr. Parker, who stood her ground, radiating academic authority. And finally, he looked at Rebecca, whose story was already unraveling in her frantic expression. Is that true, sir? The captain asked Marcus directly. No, Captain, it is not, Marcus said simply. But I believe this can all be resolved on the ground. I have no desire to delay this flight's arrival. Please, everyone, sit down. It was a command delivered with the quiet authority of a man used to being obeyed. Reluctantly, Dr. Parker sat buckling her seatbelt with a snap of defiance. David guided a fuming Rebecca back toward the galley. Captain Rodriguez gave Marcus a long, assessing look, nodded once, and returned to the cockpit. The spell was broken, but the damage was done. The line had been crossed at 35,000 feet, and for Rebecca Thompson, the ground was rushing up to meet her far faster than the plane. Marcus Wright picked up his tablet. His work on Project Eagle was done. A new, far more urgent project had just taken its place. The rest of the descent was thick with an unbearable tension. Rebecca Thompson did not re-emerge from the galley. David and Maria completed the pre-landing checks with grim, tight-lipped efficiency, avoiding eye contact with everyone involved. As the plane taxied to the gate at Heathrow, Marcus felt a profound sense of disappointment. The incident had tainted what was supposed to be a triumphant trip. He wasn't just angry. He was weary of having to constantly prove his worth, his place, his very existence in spaces where others were simply allowed to be. When the plane finally docked, and the seatbelt sign switched off, Marcus remained seated, letting the other passengers disembark. He was in no hurry. Dr. Emily Parker paused as she passed his seat. "Mr. Wright," she said, her voice sincere. "I am so sorry you had to endure that. If you need a witness for a formal complaint, please do not hesitate to ask." She discreetly passed him her business card. "Thank you, Dr. Parker. Your support means more than you know," Marcus replied, accepting the card. "I may just take you up on that." Richard Bennett also stopped. "That was inexcusable, sir. I'd be happy to provide a statement as well." He handed Marcus his card. "Richard Bennett, Apex Marketing Group." "I appreciate that, Mr. Bennett," Marcus said with a nod. He was the last passenger to leave the first-class cabin. As he stepped into the jet bridge, he saw David Ramirez standing by the aircraft door, his expression deeply troubled. "Mr. Wright," David began, his voice low, "on behalf of the crew, I am truly sorry for what happened on this flight. It was unacceptable." Marcus looked at him, his gaze level and unreadable. "Was it David?" "Sir, you were the purser. You are in a position of leadership. You saw what was happening from the very beginning. You saw it, and you did nothing until it exploded. Your apology is noted." David flinched as if struck. The polite but firm rebuke hit its mark. Marcus didn't wait for a response. He walked down the jet bridge, his face a mask of calm determination. He was no longer just a passenger. He was Marcus Wright, CEO of Horizon Systems, and the gears of his mind were already turning, executing a plan with cold, swift precision. Marcus bypassed the long lines at immigration, using the automated gates for registered travelers. As he walked toward baggage claim, he pulled out his phone. He did not call the airline's customer service hotline. He did not draft an angry email. Such methods were for ordinary customers with ordinary complaints. His situation was now anything but ordinary. He dialed the number of his executive assistant, Olivia Martinez, back in New York. She was legendary for her efficiency and discretion, having worked with Marcus for nearly a decade. It was the middle of the night for her, but she answered on the first ring, her voice instantly alert. "Marcus, you've landed. Is everything all right?" Her intuition told her something was wrong. Marcus rarely called during off hours unless absolutely necessary. "Olivia, I need you to do 3 things for me immediately," Marcus said, his voice calm, but carrying an undercurrent of steel that Olivia recognized immediately. "First, cancel the black car service I have waiting for me. I'll be taking a taxi. Second, I need you to get James Wilson on the phone. He's the Executive VP of Operations for SkyGlobal Airways North Atlantic Division. Tell his assistant it is an urgent matter regarding the final sign-off for Project Eagle. Set a video call for 9:30 a.m. London time, which is in about an hour and a half. Make it clear this call is non-negotiable." "Okay," Olivia said, the sound of typing already audible in the background. "Cancel the car. Secure a non-negotiable call with James Wilson at 9:30 a.m. London time. What's the third thing?" Marcus paused, his eyes hardening. "Third, I need you to get me the full crew manifest for SkyGlobal Flight 247 New York to Heathrow, which landed today. I want the full name and employee ID of every single flight attendant on that plane, particularly the senior purser and a flight attendant named Rebecca Thompson." There was a moment of silence on Olivia's end. Then understood. "It might take some doing to get a manifest, but I have a contact in the corporate liaison office who owes me a favor. I'll get it." She paused. "Marcus, is the deal in jeopardy?" "Every deal is in jeopardy until the ink is dry." "Olivia," he said, "let's just say we're reassessing the human interface components of our new strategic partnership. I'll brief you after my call with Mr. Wilson." He hung up and walked past the car service area where a driver was holding a sign that read, "Wright." He exited the terminal, joining the queue for a traditional London black cab. He didn't want the comfort and privilege of a pre-arranged car. He wanted the anonymity of a taxi, a moment to himself to codify his thoughts before the corporate battle began. As the cab sped through the early morning London traffic toward his hotel in Canary Wharf, Marcus looked out at the city lights. He felt no rage, no desire for petty revenge. He felt a profound sense of duty, a duty to his company, to protect it from a partnership with a brand whose culture was clearly toxic. A duty to himself, to uphold the dignity he had fought so hard to earn, and a duty to every other person who had ever been made to feel small, to feel like they didn't belong. Rebecca Thompson thought she was just insulting a passenger. She had no idea she had just become a multi-million-dollar liability on a corporate balance sheet. The trial she had conducted in the court of her own prejudice was over. Now a new trial was about to begin in a boardroom, and Marcus Wright would be the judge, the jury, and the executioner. In a glass-walled office high above Canary Wharf, James Wilson, executive vice president of SkyGlobal Airways, was having a magnificent morning. He sipped his espresso, looking over the final draft of the press release. SkyGlobal Airways soars into the future with landmark $3.5 billion Horizon Systems partnership, the headline read. This deal, Project Eagle, was his baby. He had championed it for 2 years, convincing a skeptical board that this massive investment was the only way to save the airline from its downward spiral of inefficiency and customer dissatisfaction. The signature from Horizon's CEO, Marcus Wright, due to happen in just a few hours, was the culmination of his entire career. He was already imagining the bonuses, the accolades, the promotion to the C-suite. His bliss was shattered when his assistant Laura Phillips buzzed in, her voice tight with panic. "James, I have Olivia Martinez from Horizon Systems on the line. She says Mr. Wright needs to speak with you urgently." She called it non-negotiable. James's stomach dropped. Non-negotiable. The signing was at 10:30 a.m. What could possibly— Did she say what it's about? He asked, struggling to keep his voice steady. She said it's regarding the final sign-off on Project Eagle. She wants a video call with you at 9:30 a.m. A cold sweat broke out on James's brow. An urgent, non-negotiable call an hour before the biggest signing in his company's history could only mean one thing: disaster. "Set it up now," he barked, his good mood evaporating completely. For the next 55 minutes, James paced his office like a caged animal, his mind racing through every possible catastrophe. Had a rival tech firm swooped in with a better offer? Was there a last-minute legal snag? Had their stock price dipped overnight? At precisely 9:30 a.m., the video call connected. Marcus Wright's face appeared on the large screen in James's office. He was not in a boardroom as James expected. He was in a hotel suite, dressed immaculately in his suit, but his tie was slightly loosened. He looked calm, but it was the calm of a Category 5 hurricane's eye. "Marcus." "Good to see you," James began, trying to inject false heartiness into his voice. "Bit of a last-minute chat before the big moment, eh?" "Getting cold feet." He tried to laugh, but it came out as a strangled croak. Marcus did not smile. "James," he said, his voice flat and devoid of warmth, "I'm calling to inform you that the 10:00 a.m. signing is postponed indefinitely." The words hit James Wilson like a physical blow. He staggered back and sank into his chair. "Postponed," James whispered. "Marcus, what are you talking about? The board is assembling. The press is on standby. This is a $3.5 billion deal. You can't just postpone it." "Oh, I can." "James," Marcus replied, his voice dropping to an icy calm. "And I have. My signature will not appear on any document binding my company to yours today, and I need to tell you exactly why." For the next 15 minutes, Marcus Wright recounted the events of Flight 247. He did not raise his voice. He did not use emotional language. He spoke with the dispassionate precision of an engineer detailing a catastrophic system failure. He detailed the boarding pass incident, the deliberate service snubs the lie about the filet mignon, the targeted questioning of his membership status, the accidental water spill and lack of assistance, and finally the public humiliation involving the amenity kit and the sneering suggestion that he belonged in economy. He mentioned David Ramirez by name, citing a failure of leadership. He named Rebecca Thompson as the primary source of the hostile and discriminatory environment. He even mentioned the unsolicited intervention of Dr. Emily Parker, a Columbia University professor who had taken meticulous notes, and Richard Bennett, a marketing executive who had witnessed much of the behavior. As James Wilson listened, his face went from red to ghostly white. This wasn't a complaint. This was an indictment. The CEO of their single most important new partner had been systematically harassed by one of his own employees on a flagship international flight. The irony was gut-wrenching. A company signing a multi-billion-dollar deal to fix its operational failures was displaying its most toxic cultural failure at the highest possible level. "Marcus, I am speechless," James stammered when Marcus finished. "This is horrifying, unacceptable. I will have her terminated immediately. I will personally see to it that this woman is fired before the day is out. We'll make it right. A personal apology from our CEO. We can compensate you, upgrade you for life." Marcus held up a hand, cutting him off. "James, you're missing the point," he said calmly. "This isn't about me, and it's not about one bad apple. Your purser, a manager, stood by and did nothing. That's not a personnel problem. That's a cultural problem. It's a fundamental rot within your organization. My company, Horizon Systems, has a brand built on precision, excellence, and integrity. We are about to link that brand to yours. Project Eagle is designed to fix your logistical problems, but I'm now forced to question if your human problems are too deep to fix." He leaned closer to his camera. "The contract is postponed. James, not canceled yet. I expect a full and thorough investigation into this incident. I expect a detailed report on my desk by Monday morning, outlining not just the disciplinary action taken against the individuals involved, but the concrete, actionable steps SkyGlobal Airways will be taking to address the pervasive cultural issues that allowed this to happen. I want to see new training protocols, new accountability measures, and a new standard for customer respect." James was sweating profusely, his mind reeling. The deal wasn't dead, but it was on life support, and Marcus Wright had his finger on the plug. "You'll have it, Marcus. You'll have it all. I will move heaven and earth," James promised, his voice trembling. "You do that," Marcus said. "My signature and the $3.5 billion that comes with it depends on it. We are supposed to be partners, James. And right now, I have zero confidence in my partner's ability to perform. You have until Monday to change my mind." The screen went blank. James Wilson sat in stunned silence for a full minute. Then he grabbed his phone and jabbed the speed dial for Heathrow's head of in-flight services. His voice was no longer the smooth baritone of an executive. It was the roar of a wounded lion. "Get me the crew of Flight 247 from JFK. Get them now. Nobody goes home. And find me a flight attendant named Rebecca Thompson. Her career with this airline is over." The karma that had been circling at 35,000 feet had finally brutally landed. For Rebecca Thompson, the walk from the aircraft to the crew briefing room at Heathrow was a victory lap of self-righteousness. She strode through the bustling terminal corridors, her mind a cinematic reel, replaying the flight's final dramatic moments. In her version of events, she was the steadfast hero, a veteran of the skies, upholding the standards of a once great airline against the entitlement of the modern world. The man in 2A was a classic case, probably some tech employee who'd used points to upgrade and didn't understand the unwritten rules of the cabin. He was arrogant and demanding. The woman in 2D was an interfering academic busybody, the worst kind of passenger, always looking for something to be offended by. Rebecca mentally rehearsed the scathing report she would file. She'd paint Marcus Wright as disruptive, and David Ramirez as weak and ineffective, a purser who had failed to back up his senior crew. 20 years she had given this airline. She knew people. She had an instinct for who belonged and who didn't. And her gut had been screaming that the man in 2A was an imposter in a world he hadn't earned. The crew was instructed to wait in the main briefing room, a stark, functional space that smelled of stale coffee and disinfectant. The instruction was unusual. Normally, they were released within 20 minutes of clearing customs. A wave of grumbling filled the room as flight attendants and pilots sank into the uncomfortable chairs, their exhaustion warring with a growing sense of unease. "What's this about?" one of the junior attendants whispered. Did we have a security breach? Probably some new corporate nonsense, another replied, rolling her eyes. David Ramirez sat apart from the group, his face pale and clammy. He nervously checked his phone, avoiding Rebecca's triumphant gaze. He knew this wasn't about a new policy. He had felt the seismic shift in the cabin when the captain had intervened. He had seen the look in Marcus Wright's eyes, not of anger, but of cold, calculated assessment. It was the look of a man who doesn't lose arguments. 10 minutes later, the door swung open, with a force that silenced the room. Two figures entered, and the atmosphere instantly changed from weary annoyance to acute dread. The first was Victoria Adams, the head of in-flight services for the entire European sector. She was a legend in the company, a formidable woman with a reputation for being tough but fair. Beside her was a stern-looking man in a perfectly tailored dark suit they didn't recognize. He carried a leather portfolio and radiated an aura of corporate authority that made even the pilots sit up straighter. Victoria Adams. Her eyes cold and hard as chips of granite scanned the room. They passed over the anxious faces before landing with pinpoint accuracy on Rebecca. Rebecca Thompson. David Ramirez. My office. Now. Her voice was quiet, but it cut through the room like a razor. Every head turned to stare. The walk to her glass-walled office down the corridor was the longest of their lives. David felt a nauseating lurch in his stomach, his feet like lead. Rebecca, however, lifted her chin, her indignation a suit of armor. This was her chance to be heard by senior management to finally expose the declining standards she'd been complaining about for years. As soon as the door clicked shut, Victoria Adams's professional veneer dissolved into barely contained fury. "What in God's name did you do on my aircraft?" she demanded, her voice a low, dangerous growl. The man from HR remained standing, a silent, imposing sentinel by the door. "I was handling a difficult and disruptive passenger." Victoria. Rebecca began launching into her well-rehearsed narrative. He was making unreasonable demands, refusing to accept that certain amenities were unavailable, and he became agitated when, "Stop!" the HR manager interrupted. His voice was calm, yet it held an absolute finality that froze the words in Rebecca's throat. "Just stop talking. We have a preliminary report here based on a video call that took place less than an hour ago between our Executive Vice President of Operations and the passenger in question. The passenger, Mr. Marcus Wright." Rebecca let out a short, contemptuous laugh. "And who is Marcus Wright that his petty complaint gets the attention of an executive VP before the crew has even filed their own report?" Victoria Adams leaned forward, her knuckles white as she gripped the edge of her massive oak desk. Her eyes bored into Rebecca's. "Marcus Wright," she said, enunciating each syllable with lethal precision, "is the founder and chief executive officer of Horizon Systems." The name hung in the air. Rebecca's smile faltered. Horizon. She'd seen the name in corporate newsletters, the breathless memos about Project Eagle. It was the massive company-saving technology overhaul. Her mind began to spin, trying to connect the dots. The HR manager stepped forward, opening his portfolio. Mr. Wright was flying to London to attend a 10 a.m. meeting with our entire executive board. At that meeting, he was scheduled to sign a contract for Project Eagle, a contract Ms. Thompson worth $3.5 billion. He paused, letting the astronomical figure sink in. "A contract that he has now put on indefinite hold because of your conduct. You didn't just insult a passenger, Rebecca. You just took a lit match to the single most important business deal in this airline's last decade. You jeopardized the financial stability of this entire company and the paychecks of every single person who works for it, including your own." The armor of indignation shattered. The color drained from Rebecca's face, leaving a pasty, slack-jawed mask of disbelief. The man in 2A, the quiet, dignified man she had tormented for 7 hours, that man was worth billions. It wasn't possible. Her instincts, her infallible gut that had guided her for 20 years, had led her off a cliff. "We have multiple witness statements already being collected." The HR manager continued, his tone clinical and detached. "A Dr. Emily Parker of Columbia University, a passenger in 2D, has already emailed a detailed time-stamped log of your conduct. She describes it as, and I quote, a textbook case of racially motivated discrimination and harassment executed with a deliberate and escalating pattern of malice. She has offered her services as an expert witness. The passenger in 2C, a Mr. Richard Bennett, has corroborated her story entirely. The man in 3B confirmed you lied about the filet mignon being unavailable. He turned his cold gaze on David, who looked as if he was about to faint. Mr. Ramirez, your own preliminary statement admits you were aware of an escalating situation, and in your capacity as purser and direct supervisor, you failed to intervene. That constitutes a grave failure of leadership. That failure will be dealt with. It will result in a formal final reprimand on your record, a demotion from purser status for 1 year, and mandatory intensive management and de-escalation retraining. David nodded numbly, a wave of sickening relief washing over him. It was brutal, but it wasn't the end. The HR manager turned back to Rebecca. But Ms. Thompson, your actions fall into a different category entirely. Gross misconduct. Willful brand endangerment. He slid a tablet across the desk. I have here the clause from your employment agreement regarding our airline's zero-tolerance policy for discrimination of any kind. Rebecca stared at him, her world collapsing in on itself. The words didn't compute. Your employment with SkyGlobal Airways is terminated effective immediately. No. Rebecca whispered, her voice cracking. No, you can't. I have 20 years of seniority. The union. Your union has already been notified. Rebecca Victoria Adams said, her voice now filled with a weary sadness. They were briefed on the circumstances and the catastrophic financial exposure. They will not protect you from this. The evidence is irrefutable. You are a liability we can no longer afford. You did this to yourself. The fight, the arrogance, the 2 decades of self-importance, it all evaporated, leaving behind a pathetic, bewildered woman on the verge of tears. It was a mistake, she pleaded, her voice a desperate rasp. I misjudged the situation. You judged a man by the color of his skin. The HR manager corrected her flatly. And you were wrong. Airport security is waiting outside. They will escort you to collect your personal items from your locker, and then they will escort you from the premises. The arrival of 2 uniformed security officers sealed her fate. Rebecca Thompson, the self-proclaimed queen of the cabin, was unceremoniously marched out of the office past the stunned and silent faces of her former crew. They now knew what had happened, the whispers spreading like wildfire. They didn't see a victim. They saw a ghost, a cautionary tale of prejudice so profound it had nearly sunk them all. The ripple effects were immediate. By day's end, an emergency memo from the CEO was in every employee's inbox worldwide. It announced a mandatory top-to-bottom overhaul of all customer service de-escalation and implicit bias training to be designed by a leading third-party consultancy. It was a corporate earthquake. Meanwhile, in his suite at the Savoy, a thick dossier was delivered to Marcus Wright. It contained the full investigation report confirmation of Rebecca's termination and David's disciplinary action, and a detailed multi-phase plan to address the cultural failings within SkyGlobal Airways. It was followed by a personal, deeply apologetic phone call from the airline's CEO, Elizabeth Hamilton. Marcus read the report carefully, his expression unreadable. He felt no joy at Rebecca's firing, only a deep sense of melancholy. Her personal ruin was not the goal. The goal was change. The airline's response, swift and comprehensive, showed him they understood the stakes. They had been shocked into a moment of genuine self-reflection. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. That evening, as Marcus prepared for the next day's meeting, his phone rang. It was his sister Maya calling from Baltimore. Hey, big brother, she said when he answered. Just checking in. How was the flight? Marcus hesitated. He rarely burdened his family with his professional challenges or the racial indignities he faced. But Maya had always been his confidant, his touchstone to the world they'd grown up in. It was educational, he said finally. Uh-oh, I know that tone. What happened? Marcus described the experience, not minimizing the pain, but not dwelling on it either. Maya listened without interrupting. "You know what Dad would say," she said when he finished. Marcus smiled despite himself. "That it's not about how they treat you, but how you respond that defines who you are." Exactly. So how are you responding, CEO? By making sure it doesn't happen to the next person. By using the leverage I have to create actual change. That's my brother, Maya said proudly. Using your position to lift others. Mom and Dad would be proud. The conversation shifted to family news. Maya's kids, their extended family in Baltimore. The community programs Marcus continued to fund in their old neighborhood. By the time they said goodbye, Marcus felt centered again, reconnected to his purpose beyond the immediate corporate battle. The incident on Flight 247 wasn't just a professional challenge. It was a reminder of why his success mattered, not for the wealth or status, but for the power it gave him to effect change in systems that had historically excluded people who looked like him. Every barrier he broke made the path a little wider for those who followed. As he looked out at the London skyline from his hotel window, Marcus felt a renewed sense of purpose. Tomorrow wouldn't just be about signing a contract. It would be about using his position to demand better, not just for himself, but for everyone. Later that afternoon, he met James Wilson and the SkyGlobal board. The atmosphere in the grand boardroom was not celebratory but somber and deeply respectful. Before the contracts were presented, Marcus stood and addressed the room. What happened on Flight 247 was not an isolated incident, he said quietly, his voice carrying to every corner of the hushed room. It was a symptom of a deeper issue, a culture that allowed prejudice to fester under the guise of seniority and authority. Your response over the past 48 hours has been decisive. It has shown me that you are willing to treat the disease rather than just the symptom. My signature today is not an absolution. It is an investment in your commitment to change. Our partnership is contingent on you following through with every single reform you have proposed. He then took the heavy gold-plated fountain pen they offered him, and signed the document. As the pen left the paper, Marcus felt an unexpected emotion wash over him, not triumph or vindication, but a quiet pride in having used his position to create a moment of genuine transformation. The contract was signed, but the real work was just beginning. A quiet collective sigh of relief filled the room. Project Eagle was alive, but it was now more than a technological transformation. It had become a catalyst for cultural change as well. Elizabeth Hamilton, SkyGlobal's CEO, spoke next. "Mr. Wright, your willingness to proceed with this partnership, despite what happened, speaks to your character and vision. We failed you. There's no other way to put it. But your response, holding us accountable, rather than simply walking away, has given us an opportunity to become better. Not just more efficient, but more equitable. Not just more profitable, but more principled. We won't waste this opportunity." The words were corporate, but the sentiment behind them seemed genuine. Marcus nodded his acknowledgement. Time would tell whether the commitment was real or merely a crisis-induced promise. But the groundwork had been laid for something meaningful. Meanwhile, across London, Rebecca Thompson sat alone in her modest flat, staring at the termination papers spread across her kitchen table. 20 years of service ended in 20 minutes. Her phone had been ringing non-stop, colleagues, friends, even a few journalists who had somehow gotten wind of the story. She ignored them all. The shock was giving way to a terrible clarity. For the first time, she was forced to confront the truth about herself, about the countless passengers she had judged, dismissed, or mistreated based on her prejudices. Marcus Wright wasn't the first. He was simply the first with the power to hold her accountable. In her bathroom mirror, she caught a glimpse of herself. Not the confident, authoritative flight attendant, but a middle-aged woman whose certainties had crumbled, whose self-image had been shattered. "Who am I without this job?" she whispered to her reflection. The mirror offered no answers, only the unfiltered truth of a woman who had defined herself by her uniform and now stood exposed without it. The realization was painful, but necessary. She had been wrong not just about Marcus Wright, but about so many others she had judged based on appearance, rather than character. The thought was like a stone in her stomach, heavy and indigestible. But it was the beginning of something new, a painful self-awareness that might, if she allowed it, lead to genuine growth. David Ramirez sat in a different kind of purgatory. His career wasn't over, but it was forever altered. The formal reprimand would follow him for years. The demotion was a public acknowledgement of his failure. The mandatory retraining was a humiliation he would have to endure in front of colleagues who had once looked up to him. But unlike Rebecca, David felt something beyond the shock and fear, a dawning recognition of his complicity. He had seen what was happening. He had known it was wrong, and he had done nothing until it was too late. The weight of that moral failure pressed on him more heavily than any corporate punishment. As he rode the tube back to his apartment, David replayed every moment of the flight in his mind, identifying each point where he could have, should have intervened. The opportunities had been numerous, the risks minimal. Yet he had chosen silence and inaction every time. Never again, he whispered to himself, a promise he intended to keep. The cost had been too high, not just to his career, but to his sense of himself as a decent human being. Some lessons came at a terrible price, but if learned well, they need only be taught once. Back at the Savoy, Marcus Wright prepared for his return flight to New York. The contract was signed, the immediate crisis averted. But he knew the real work was just beginning. Cultural change didn't happen overnight, and he intended to hold SkyGlobal accountable for every promise they had made. He picked up his phone and called Olivia. "It's done," he said simply. "The contract is signed," she asked. "Yes, but that's not what I meant," Marcus replied. "A process has begun, a necessary one." Olivia, who had worked with Marcus long enough to understand his methods, knew exactly what he meant. "Sometimes systems need a shock to evolve," she said. "Exactly," Marcus agreed. "Book me on tomorrow's flight back to New York. But not on SkyGlobal. Let's give them some time to implement their new training." "Already done," Olivia replied. "You're on British Airways first class, departing at 2:15 p.m. And Marcus, yes, I'm proud to work for you." Marcus smiled, a rare, genuine smile after a draining 2 days. "Thank you, Olivia. That means more than you know." In New York, the news of what had happened rippled through Horizon Systems headquarters. Olivia Martinez had briefed the executive team, discreetly sharing only the essential details. The story they crafted for public consumption was simple. Minor contractual details had delayed the signing by 48 hours, but all issues were now resolved. The press release announcing the partnership went out as planned, albeit 2 days late, with no hint of the drama that had unfolded. But within the corridors of power at both companies, the incident became an inflection point, a case study in accountability and consequences. 3 days later, Marcus was back in his corner office in the Horizon Systems Tower in Midtown Manhattan. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city, but his attention was focused on the detailed report SkyGlobal had delivered as promised. It was comprehensive, outlining immediate actions taken, medium-term policy changes already in progress, and long-term cultural initiatives designed to prevent similar incidents in the future. Most importantly, it showed a genuine commitment to addressing the root causes rather than just the symptoms. The door to his office opened, and Olivia entered with a tablet in hand. "You have a call in 5 minutes with James Wilson and Elizabeth Hamilton," she reminded him. "They want to discuss the implementation timeline for Project Eagle in light of the new training requirements." Marcus nodded. "Thank you, Olivia. Please put them through when they call." Exactly 5 minutes later, his screen lit up with the incoming video call. James Wilson and Elizabeth Hamilton, SkyGlobal's CEO, appeared side by side. Their expressions were serious but determined. "Marcus, thank you for taking our call," Elizabeth began. "We've reviewed the implementation timeline for Project Eagle, and we've made some adjustments we'd like to discuss with you." For the next 30 minutes, they walked through the modified schedule. The technical aspects would proceed as planned, but the human interface components, the training of staff to use the new systems, would be integrated with the enhanced customer service and anti-bias training now being developed. We see this as an opportunity, Elizabeth explained. Rather than treating these as separate initiatives, we're using this moment to completely reimagine how our staff interacts with both our technological systems and our passengers. Every touchpoint is being reconsidered. Let me translate that from CEO speak, James added, with a new directness that Marcus appreciated. We're rolling out an enterprise-wide culture shift, leveraging the Eagle interface to hardwire DEI metrics into our KPIs across all customer-facing verticals. The tech stack becomes the accountability framework. Marcus raised an eyebrow, impressed by the corporate jargon, but more impressed by the substance behind it. You're using the technology to enforce the cultural changes. Exactly, Elizabeth confirmed. The predictive algorithms in Eagle will flag potential service inconsistencies before they become problems. For instance, if a particular crew member shows a pattern of spending significantly less time with certain demographic groups, the system will flag it for coaching intervention before it escalates to a customer complaint. This was an unexpected and innovative approach, using the very technology that had brought them together to enforce the cultural changes prompted by the incident. It demonstrated a level of strategic thinking that went beyond damage control. I appreciate the thoughtfulness of this approach, Marcus said. Integration makes sense. Technology is only as good as the people using it. Exactly. James agreed, visibly relieved at Marcus's positive response. We've also taken your suggestion about having Dr. Parker consult on the training program. Her expertise in organizational behavior is proving invaluable. The meeting concluded with a renewed sense of partnership and purpose. As the screen went dark, Marcus leaned back in his chair, reflecting on the unexpected journey of the past week. What had begun as a humiliating experience had transformed into a catalyst for change that would affect thousands of employees and millions of passengers. His phone buzzed with a text message from Dr. Emily Parker. Just finished my first workshop with SkyGlobal's training team. They're serious about this. Real change happening. Thought you'd want to know. Marcus smiled and typed a reply. Thank you, Dr. Parker. Your intervention made a difference. I won't forget it. He then opened his email to find a message from Richard Bennett, the marketing executive who had witnessed the incident on the plane. Mr. Wright, I hope this finds you well. I wanted to let you know that I shared our experience on Flight 247 with my colleagues at Apex Marketing. As a result, we're developing a new diversity training module, specifically focused on the hospitality and travel industries. Your dignified response to a difficult situation has inspired us to be part of the solution. Thank you. These ripple effects were the true measure of success. Not the firing of one flight attendant, not even the signing of a multi-billion-dollar contract, but the quiet spreading impact of standing firm against injustice. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, David Ramirez was experiencing his own transformation. The retraining program was rigorous and often uncomfortable, forcing him to confront his own passive complicity in a toxic culture. Each day brought new insights, new perspectives, and new resolve. In one particularly powerful session, the facilitator, a former airline executive turned diversity consultant, posed a simple question. What prevents us from speaking up when we witness wrongdoing? The answers from the group came slowly. At first, then in a rush. Fear of conflict, uncertainty about authority, concern for professional relationships, the bystander effect, the path of least resistance. When it was David's turn to speak, he took a deep breath. All of those things played a part, he admitted. But there was something else, something more fundamental. I told myself it wasn't my problem. I told myself it would resolve itself. I abdicated my responsibility, not just as a purser, but as a human being. The facilitator nodded. And what would you do differently now? David didn't hesitate. I would remember that leadership isn't just about following procedures. It's about moral courage. It's about doing what's right, especially when it's difficult. The words felt transformative as he spoke them. For the first time since the incident, David felt not just remorse, but hope. Hope that he could learn from his failure and become not just a better airline employee, but a better person. An unexpected event 2 days later tested this newfound resolve. As he was deadheading back to New York in economy class, David witnessed a flight attendant making disparaging remarks about an elderly couple who needed extra time to stow their luggage. The comments weren't made directly to the passengers, but within earshot of other crew members. In the past, David would have ignored it, or perhaps even chuckled along. But now, with his recent experience fresh in his mind, he approached the flight attendant during a quiet moment in the galley. "That couple deserves our patience and respect," he said quietly but firmly. "We never know their full story, and our job is to make everyone feel welcome, not judged." The flight attendant looked startled, then defensive, but David's calm certainty left no room for argument. It was a small moment, insignificant in the grand scheme of things, but for David, it represented something crucial, the beginning of active allyship rather than passive complicity. Rebecca Thompson was having a very different experience. The shock of her termination had given way to anger, then to a desperate scramble for employment. But her reputation had preceded her. The airline industry was tightly knit, and word had spread quickly. No major carrier would touch her. She finally found work as a receptionist at a small dental practice, earning a third of her former salary. The irony wasn't lost on her. She now spent her days greeting people from all walks of life, required to treat each one with courtesy and respect, regardless of appearance or background. One afternoon, a black businessman in an expensive suit entered the office. For a brief, disorienting moment, Rebecca thought it was Marcus Wright come to witness her downfall. But it was just another patient with a routine appointment. Still, something about him, his quiet dignity, his professional demeanor, triggered a wave of shame so intense she had to excuse herself to the bathroom. Staring at herself in the mirror, Rebecca confronted the ugly truth she had been avoiding. Her treatment of Marcus Wright hadn't been an aberration or a misunderstanding. It had been the natural extension of prejudices she had harbored for years. Prejudices she had justified as maintaining standards or professional intuition. The realization left her nauseated. "I was wrong," she whispered to her reflection. "I've been wrong for 20 years. It was the first honest moment in a long, painful journey towards self-awareness. There would be no dramatic redemption arc for Rebecca Thompson. No tearful reconciliation with Marcus Wright. Just the slow, unglamorous work of confronting her own biases and trying to become a better person, not for career advancement or public redemption, but because she had finally recognized the damage she had caused. The most profound change, however, was happening within SkyGlobal Airways itself. The incident had exposed fault lines in the corporate culture that had been ignored for too long. Employees at all levels were now engaged in conversations about respect, inclusion, and accountability that would have been unthinkable just weeks before. Flight attendants who had witnessed similar behavior in the past, but remained silent, now felt empowered to speak up. Managers who had turned a blind eye to problems now took a more active role in shaping the culture of their teams. The message was clear. What had happened to Rebecca Thompson could happen to anyone who failed to uphold the company's renewed commitment to treating all passengers with dignity and respect. The story of Flight 247 became a case study in the company's training materials, a powerful reminder of how quickly a single interaction could escalate from a personal slight to a corporate crisis with multi-billion-dollar implications. In the end, what had begun as one woman's prejudice had transformed into an opportunity for institutional growth and renewal. The cost had been high. A career destroyed, a reputation tarnished, a partnership nearly lost. But the impact would resonate far beyond a single flight, a single airline, or even a single industry. It was a reminder that in an interconnected world, the consequences of our actions can reach further than we ever imagine, and that true leadership is measured not by authority, but by the courage to stand for what is right, even when standing alone. 6 weeks after the incident on Flight 247, SkyGlobal Airways held an all-hands meeting at their global headquarters in New York. The company's 65,000 employees worldwide participated either in person or via video link. It was an unprecedented gathering, a clear signal that something fundamental was changing. Elizabeth Hamilton, the CEO, stood at the podium, her expression grave but determined. "Today marks a new chapter in our company's history," she began. "6 weeks ago, an incident occurred that forced us to look in the mirror and confront some uncomfortable truths about our culture, our values, and our future. I'm not going to sugarcoat this. We failed. We failed a passenger. We failed our partners. Most importantly, we failed ourselves." A hush fell over the assembled employees as she continued. What happened on Flight 247 was not an isolated incident. It was a symptom of a culture that had lost its way, that had allowed certain behaviors to go unchecked, that had forgotten our fundamental purpose to connect people with respect and dignity. She outlined the comprehensive changes being implemented across the organization, the new training programs developed in partnership with diversity experts, the revised reporting structures that encouraged employees to speak up when they witnessed inappropriate behavior, the accountability measures that ensured management took such reports seriously. But policies and procedures are just words on paper if we don't commit to living them every day, she emphasized. This is about who we are and who we want to be. It's about recognizing that every interaction, every decision, every moment matters. As she spoke, screens around the room displayed the first phase of implementation for Project Eagle, the technology transformation that was now inextricably linked with the cultural transformation. Our partnership with Horizon Systems is about more than just upgrading our technology, Elizabeth explained. It's about reimagining our entire approach to serving our passengers and supporting our employees. The technical systems and the human systems must evolve together. She went on to detail 3 revolutionary features of Project Eagle that would transform their operations. First, the predictive maintenance module will reduce aircraft downtime by identifying potential equipment failures before they occur. This means fewer cancellations, fewer delays, and more reliable service for our customers. We're projecting a 63% reduction in maintenance-related disruptions. Second, the dynamic crew. Scheduling system will optimize staff deployment using AI algorithms that account for everything from weather patterns to historical passenger behavior. This means more efficient operations, better work-life balance for our crew, and a more consistent experience for our passengers. We expect this to reduce crew fatigue by 28% and improve on-time performance by 17%. Third, the customer experience platform will create seamless personalization across all touchpoints from booking to baggage claim. This means recognizing and anticipating our customers' needs before they have to ask, ensuring consistent service quality regardless of who is providing it, and creating a travel experience that feels both efficient and human. As she detailed these features, Elizabeth made a critical connection. But here's the thing. None of this technology matters if we don't get the human element right. The most sophisticated software in the world can't compensate for a culture that doesn't value every customer equally. In the audience, Marcus Wright listened quietly. He had been invited as an honored guest, a symbol of the new partnership between the two companies. But his presence served another purpose as well, a reminder of the cost of failure and the value of accountability. When Elizabeth finished her address, she invited Marcus to join her on stage. The applause was respectful, rather than enthusiastic, tinged with the collective recognition of how close they had come to disaster. "Mr. Wright, your experience with our airline was unacceptable," Elizabeth said, facing him directly. Her words broadcast to every employee around the world. "On behalf of everyone at SkyGlobal, I apologize. But more importantly, I thank you not just for giving us a second chance with Project Eagle, but for forcing us to confront issues we had ignored for too long." Marcus stepped to the microphone, his quiet voice carrying clearly through the hall. "Thank you, Elizabeth. I accepted your apology weeks ago, but I appreciate you making it public today. That transparency speaks volumes about the direction SkyGlobal is heading." He paused, looking out at the sea of faces. What happened to me on Flight 247 was unfortunately not unusual. What is unusual is the response, not just the swift accountability for those directly involved, but the commitment to address the underlying conditions that allowed it to happen in the first place. That's the difference between damage control and genuine change. He gestured to the screens showing the Project Eagle interface. This technology will transform how your airline operates. It will save time, reduce costs, enhance efficiency. But technology alone can't create the experience you want for your passengers. That requires humanity, the recognition of the dignity and worth of every person who steps onto your aircraft, regardless of their appearance, background, or the color of their skin. A murmur of agreement rippled through the audience. "I believe in what you're doing here," Marcus concluded. "I believe in this partnership, and I look forward to flying SkyGlobal again, not as a test or a challenge, but as a passenger confident in both your technical and human systems." The applause that followed was genuine and sustained. As Marcus returned to his seat, employees approached him, some to apologize, others to express their commitment to the new direction. Still others simply to thank him for his grace under pressure. One flight attendant, a young woman named Sophia Lee, shook his hand with tears in her eyes. "What happened to you happened because too many of us stayed silent for too long," she said. "It won't happen again, not on my watch." It was a sentiment echoed throughout the organization in the weeks and months that followed. The incident on Flight 247 had become a watershed moment, a line drawn between the past and the future. Employees who had previously kept their heads down now felt empowered to speak up. Managers who had turned a blind eye now took active roles in shaping a more inclusive culture. Project Eagle rolled out on schedule, its implementation seamlessly integrated with the new training programs. The technical transformation and the cultural transformation proceeded in parallel, each reinforcing the other. For Marcus Wright, the resolution brought a measure of satisfaction, but also a profound sense of responsibility. He had used his position and influence to effect change that would benefit countless others who lacked his platform and power. It was a reminder of the obligation that came with success, not just to excel personally, but to create conditions where others could do the same. The partnership between Horizon Systems and SkyGlobal Airways became a case study in corporate accountability and cultural transformation. Industry analysts noted the unusually rapid improvement in customer satisfaction metrics following the implementation of Project Eagle and the associated training programs. Employee retention improved particularly among frontline staff who reported feeling more supported in difficult situations. 3 months after the initial rollout, a small but significant moment illustrated the real-world impact of these changes. A Black executive named Jamal Williams boarded a SkyGlobal flight from Chicago to London. As he settled into his first-class seat, he braced himself for the subtle microaggressions he had come to expect when flying premium cabins. Instead, he experienced something different, service that was professional, respectful, and consistent with what he observed being provided to other passengers. No unnecessary checking of his boarding pass. No deliberate oversights during meal service. No assumptions about his status or belonging. After the flight, he wrote a note to SkyGlobal's customer service department. "I've been flying first class for over a decade, and this was the first time I didn't feel the need to mentally prepare myself for being treated as if I didn't belong there. Your crew was exceptional, not because they gave me special treatment, but because they didn't. They simply treated me like everyone else. I don't know what's changed at your airline, but whatever it is, keep doing it." The note made its way to Elizabeth Hamilton's desk, and eventually to Marcus Wright. It was a small validation, but a meaningful one. Evidence that the changes they had implemented were beginning to make a difference in the lived experiences of real passengers. And though few outside the two companies knew the full story of what had transpired on Flight 247, the ripple effects of that single interaction continued to spread, touching lives in ways that neither Marcus Wright nor Rebecca Thompson could have imagined when they first encountered each other at 39,000 feet. In the months following the incident, David Ramirez completed his retraining and began the slow process of rebuilding his career. His demotion from purser was a constant reminder of his failure of leadership, but it also provided an opportunity for reflection and growth. He was assigned to regular economy service on short-haul flights, a significant step down from his previous international first-class routes. The reduction in pay and prestige was difficult, but David approached his new role with humility and determination. His first flight after returning to service was a routine hop from London to Paris. As he prepared the cabin for boarding, he found himself hyper-aware of his interactions with each passenger, making eye contact, offering genuine smiles, ensuring his tone remained consistent, regardless of appearance or perceived status. One passenger, an elderly black woman traveling alone, seemed anxious about the flight. In the past, David might have offered perfunctory reassurance before moving on. Now he took the time to kneel beside her seat, explain the safety procedures in detail, and promised to check on her throughout the journey. Her grateful smile was a small validation of his new approach. When a white businessman became argumentative about overhead bin space, David handled the situation with calm authority, neither escalating nor capitulating. He enforced the rules consistently while maintaining respect for all involved. These were small moments, but they represented a fundamental shift in his understanding of his role. He was not just serving drinks and demonstrating safety features. He was creating an environment where every passenger felt valued and respected. After the flight, his supervisor, who had been briefed on David's situation, offered measured praise. "Good work today, Ramirez. I noticed how you handled the overhead bin dispute. Clean, professional, consistent." "Thank you," David replied. "I'm seeing things differently now." The supervisor nodded. "Keep it up. There's a path back from this, but it's going to take time and consistency." David understood. Trust once broken was not easily restored, but he was committed to the journey however long it might take. Rebecca Thompson's journey took a very different path. After her termination, she struggled to come to terms with the consequences of her actions. The dental receptionist's job was just the beginning of a profound life change. Initially, she had clung to her sense of victimhood, telling herself and anyone who would listen that she had been scapegoated, that the airline had thrown her under the bus to save a contract. But as weeks turned into months, and as doors continued to close in her face, reality began to set in. The moment of true reckoning came when she applied for a customer service position at a high-end department store. The interview had gone well, until the hiring manager asked about her previous employment. "I see you worked for SkyGlobal Airways for 20 years, the manager said. "That's impressive longevity. May I ask why you left?" Rebecca had prepared a sanitized version of events, one that placed the blame on corporate politics and budget cuts. But as she began to recite her practiced lines, something stopped her. Perhaps it was fatigue, or perhaps it was the growing weight of self-deception. Whatever the cause, the truth spilled out. Not the full story, but enough. "I treated a passenger unfairly," she admitted. "I made assumptions based on appearance, and it cost me my job." The hiring manager's expression remained neutral. "I appreciate your honesty. That can't have been easy to share. Have you reflected on what you might do differently in a similar situation now?" The question caught Rebecca off guard. She had expected judgment, not an invitation to reflection. For the first time, she considered the question seriously. I would focus on the person, not my assumptions about them," she said slowly. "I would remember that my job is to serve, not to judge. And I would recognize that everyone deserves the same level of respect, regardless of how they look or what I think about them." The manager nodded. "That's a valuable lesson. Not everyone learns it even after a difficult experience like yours." Rebecca didn't get the job. Her lack of relevant retail experience was cited as the reason, but the conversation marked a turning point. She had acknowledged her mistake, not as something that had been done to her, but as something she had done. It was the first step toward genuine accountability. Meanwhile, at Columbia University, Dr. Emily Parker had incorporated her experience on Flight 247 into her research and teaching. With Marcus Wright's permission, she developed a case study for her organizational behavior class, examining how individual bias can manifest in workplace interactions and the ripple effects of those moments. Her students were particularly struck by the economic consequences, how a single instance of discriminatory behavior had nearly derailed a multi-billion-dollar partnership. It made the abstract concept of bias concrete and quantifiable in a way that resonated with future business leaders. Dr. Parker also accepted SkyGlobal's invitation to consult on their training programs, bringing academic rigor and evidence-based approaches to their cultural transformation efforts. Her involvement ensured that the changes were substantive rather than superficial, addressing root causes rather than symptoms. Her work with SkyGlobal led to similar engagements with other airlines and hospitality companies, creating a specialty practice focused on customer service equity and inclusion. What had begun as a disturbing incident witnessed on a transatlantic flight had evolved into a cornerstone of her professional legacy. Richard Bennett, the marketing executive who had observed the incident from seat 2C, also found his perspective transformed. Upon returning to Apex Marketing Group, he initiated a review of the company's client services, particularly how they interacted with diverse business owners and entrepreneurs. If we're making the same kinds of assumptions about our clients that I witnessed on that flight, he told his team, we're not just failing ethically, we're failing commercially. We're missing opportunities because of our blind spots. The review revealed uncomfortable truths about patterns of engagement and investment. Clients who didn't fit the traditional profile of success received less attention, fewer resources, and less favorable terms, despite comparable performance metrics. Armed with this data, Richard implemented changes to standardize service levels and ensure all clients received equitable treatment. When a colleague questioned whether these changes were necessary, suggesting they were an overreaction to a single incident, Richard was firm. What I witnessed on that flight wasn't an anomaly, he explained. It was a vivid example of patterns that exist everywhere, including here. The difference is whether we choose to see them and address them, or pretend they don't exist until they create a crisis. The colleague chastened nodded in understanding. Back at Horizon Systems, Marcus Wright incorporated lessons from the experience into his company's practices as well. He established a more rigorous vetting process for potential partners, examining not just their technical capabilities and financial stability, but their corporate culture and values. Technology doesn't exist in a vacuum, he reminded his executive team. It's designed, implemented, and used by people. If we partner with organizations whose values are fundamentally misaligned with ours, we're setting ourselves up for failure, regardless of how good the technical fit might be. This principle became known within Horizon as the SkyGlobal Standard, a reminder that partnership decisions should consider the full spectrum of organizational health, not just financial and technical factors. Marcus also became more intentional about using his influence to create opportunities for others. He expanded Horizon's internship programs, targeting underrepresented groups in technology, established mentoring relationships with promising young entrepreneurs from disadvantaged backgrounds, and used his growing public platform to advocate for greater diversity in tech leadership. These were not radical actions. Marcus had always valued diversity and inclusion, but the experience on Flight 247 had made these commitments more personal and urgent. He had been reminded in the most direct way possible that his success did not insulate him from prejudice. The only true protection was changing the environments that allowed such prejudice to flourish. As these various journeys unfolded, David's path to redemption, Rebecca's slow awakening, Dr. Parker's academic impact, Richard's corporate reforms, and Marcus's deepened commitment to change, they created a web of influence extending far beyond the original incident. Lives were changed, policies reformed, perspectives shifted. The full impact would never be fully measured or known. But in boardrooms and classrooms, in corporate training sessions and individual interactions, the echoes of what had transpired on Flight 247 continued to resonate, a reminder of both the persistent reality of bias and the possibility of transformation when that reality is confronted with clarity and courage. The transformation at SkyGlobal Airways continued to unfold in the months following the incident. The initial shock and reactive measures gave way to more thoughtful structural changes designed to reshape the company's culture from the ground up. One of the most significant reforms was a complete overhaul of the performance evaluation system for customer-facing staff. Previously, evaluations had focused primarily on efficiency metrics, boarding times, service completion, procedural compliance. The new system placed equal emphasis on passenger feedback and observable inclusive behaviors. Flight attendants were now evaluated, not just on whether they completed their tasks efficiently, but on whether they did so with consistency and respect for all passengers. Anonymous observers occasionally traveled on flights, monitoring interactions for signs of differential treatment based on appearance, accent, or perceived status. The training programs developed in consultation with Dr. Parker and other experts went beyond superficial diversity exercises to address the root causes of bias and the specific contexts in which it manifested in airline operations. Role-playing scenarios based on real incidents, including a carefully anonymized version of the Flight 247 case, helped staff recognize problematic behaviors in themselves and others. Perhaps most importantly, SkyGlobal established clear protocols for intervention when bias was observed. The silence culture that had prevented David Ramirez from addressing Rebecca Thompson's behavior was directly confronted. Staff at all levels were trained on when and how to step in with explicit assurance of protection from retaliation. "We cannot rely solely on the targets of bias to report problems," Elizabeth Hamilton explained in a company-wide communication. "By the time a passenger complains, the damage is already done. We need every member of our team to be a guardian of our values, empowered to speak up when they see something concerning." To reinforce this message, SkyGlobal established the Courage to Care Award, recognizing employees who took action to ensure all passengers were treated with dignity and respect, particularly in challenging situations. The first recipient was Maria Gonzalez, the flight attendant, who had attempted to compensate for Rebecca's behavior on Flight 247 by offering Marcus extra attention when possible. Maria didn't have the authority to directly confront the situation, Elizabeth noted during the award presentation, but she found ways within her power to mitigate the impact. That's the kind of initiative and compassion we want to celebrate. The implementation of Project Eagle proceeded in parallel with these cultural initiatives, creating a virtuous cycle of improvement. The new software systems reduced operational stress, eliminating many of the pressure points that had previously exacerbated tensions between staff and passengers. Delays decreased by 37% in the first 6 months. Baggage handling errors declined by 42%. Crew scheduling became more efficient and predictable, reducing fatigue and improving morale. Customer satisfaction scores rose steadily across all cabins and routes. These operational improvements created space for the human improvements to take root. Staff who were less stressed and better supported were more capable of providing consistent, respectful service to all passengers. The partnership between SkyGlobal and Horizon Systems deepened as both companies recognized the synergies between technical and cultural excellence. Marcus Wright became a regular participant in SkyGlobal's leadership forums, sharing insights from his experience building a values-driven technology company. In turn, SkyGlobal executives consulted with Horizon on diversity and inclusion initiatives within the tech sector. The transformation was not without challenges. Some longtime employees, particularly those who had been trained in the same era as Rebecca Thompson, resisted the changes, viewing them as an overcorrection or a capitulation to political correctness. A few chose to leave rather than adapt to the new expectations. But the majority embraced the direction, many expressing relief that issues they had long recognized were finally being addressed. Younger staff in particular responded enthusiastically to the emphasis on equity and inclusion, seeing it as alignment with their own values. One unexpected benefit emerged as the transformation took hold: Frontline employees reported feeling more empowered and engaged. By giving them clear guidelines and support for addressing difficult situations, SkyGlobal had removed a significant source of workplace stress, the tension between knowing what was right and feeling unable to act on it. A flight attendant named Jason Mendez expressed this sentiment during a town hall meeting 6 months into the implementation. Before, when I saw a colleague treating a passenger unfairly, I felt stuck. I knew it was wrong, but I didn't feel like I had the authority to say anything. Now I know exactly what to do and how to do it. And I know the company has my back when I speak up. It's made my job not just easier, but more meaningful. This sentiment was echoed across the organization, contributing to a 24% reduction in frontline employee turnover, an unexpected but welcome financial benefit of the cultural transformation. The media eventually caught wind of the broader story, not the specific details of the incident with Marcus Wright, which both companies had kept confidential, but the subsequent transformation of SkyGlobal's culture. Business publications produced features on the airline's remarkable turnaround, highlighting the integration of technological and cultural change. SkyGlobal's Renaissance. How one airline transformed from within, read the headline in Businessweek. The article detailed the comprehensive reforms without revealing the catalyst, which both SkyGlobal and Horizon had agreed to keep private out of respect for all involved. Industry analysts noted the financial impacts as well. SkyGlobal's stock price, which had been stagnant for years, began a steady climb as operational improvements translated into better financial performance. The company, once seen as a dinosaur, struggling to adapt to changing market conditions, was now viewed as an innovator, particularly in its approach to human capital management. Other airlines took notice, some implementing their own versions of SkyGlobal's reforms. The ripple effects extended throughout the industry, as competitors recognized that the combination of technological modernization and cultural transformation represented a new standard for success in a rapidly evolving marketplace. The most meaningful validation came from passengers themselves. SkyGlobal began receiving unsolicited feedback from travelers who noticed the difference in service quality and consistency. A pattern emerged in these comments. Passengers weren't just noting that service had improved, but specifically that it felt more equitable, more respectful, more human. One passenger, a woman of color who traveled frequently for business, wrote, "I've been flying with various airlines for 20 years, and I've become accustomed to being treated differently than my white colleagues. It's usually subtle, a slightly less warm greeting, a little less attention during meal service, a touch more scrutiny of my boarding pass. It's so common that I barely notice it anymore. But on my last 3 flights with SkyGlobal, something was different. I received the same service as everyone else. Not better, not special, just equal. And it was remarkable precisely because it shouldn't be remarkable at all." For the employees of SkyGlobal, such feedback was the most meaningful measure of their progress, more significant than stock prices or operational metrics. It was evidence that the changes they had implemented were making a real difference in the lived experiences of their passengers. For Marcus Wright, who received occasional updates on SkyGlobal's transformation through his ongoing partnership with the company, these stories were a powerful reminder of why he had chosen to use his influence as he did. He could have simply walked away from the deal after his experience on Flight 247, punishing the company for the actions of a single employee. Instead, he had leveraged his position to drive meaningful change that was now benefiting thousands of employees and millions of passengers. The lesson was clear in positions of power and influence. How one responds to injustice matters as much as the injustice itself. The true measure of leadership is not just in the success one achieves, but in how one uses that success to create opportunities and dignity for others. The morning of the board meeting at SkyGlobal's headquarters dawned clear and bright, a perfect spring day in New York City. Marcus Wright arrived early, taking a moment in the lobby to observe the company's operations from ground level. Check-in agents greeted passengers with consistent professionalism, regardless of cabin class or appearance. Security staff were firm but courteous. Even the coffee kiosk employees seemed to reflect the renewed emphasis on respect and dignity in every interaction. It was 6 months to the day since the incident on Flight 247, and 3 months since the full implementation of Project Eagle. The board meeting would include a comprehensive review of both the technical transformation and the cultural initiatives that had followed. As Marcus made his way to the executive floor, he reflected on the journey that had brought him to this point. What had begun as a personal affront had evolved into something much larger, a catalyst for change that had affected thousands of lives in ways both subtle and profound. The boardroom was already filling with SkyGlobal executives and directors when Marcus arrived. Elizabeth Hamilton, the CEO, greeted him warmly. "Marcus, thank you for joining us today. We're eager to share the results of the past quarter with you." "I'm looking forward to it," Marcus replied. "The preliminary reports have been encouraging." Once everyone was seated, Elizabeth called the meeting to order. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're here today to review the impact of Project Eagle and our associated cultural initiatives over the past quarter. But before we dive into the numbers, I want to acknowledge the catalyst for much of this change." She turned to Marcus. 6 months ago, an incident occurred that could have derailed our partnership with Horizon Systems. Instead, thanks to Mr. Wright's willingness to give us a second chance and hold us accountable, it became the spark for the most significant transformation in our company's recent history. There were nods around the table. Most of the board members knew at least the broad outlines of what had transpired, though the specific details had been kept confidential. "I want to express our collective gratitude," Elizabeth continued, "not just for the technology that has revolutionized our operations, but for the push to address the human elements that technology alone could never fix." Marcus acknowledged her words with a slight nod. "Technology and humanity have to evolve together," he said simply. "One without the other creates imbalance." The meeting proceeded with presentations on various aspects of Project Eagle's implementation and impact. The Chief Technology Officer detailed the technical metrics system, uptime, processing efficiency, error reduction rates. The Chief Financial Officer presented the financial implications, cost savings, revenue increases, stock price trends. But the most compelling presentation came from Victoria Adams, who had been promoted to Chief People Officer following her handling of the Flight 247 aftermath. "The numbers tell part of the story," Victoria began. "But the real transformation is happening in thousands of daily interactions between our staff and our passengers." She presented data from the new evaluation system showing steady improvement in consistency of service across all passenger demographics. Complaint rates for discriminatory treatment had declined sharply. Employee satisfaction scores had increased, particularly in response to questions about feeling supported in upholding company values. Perhaps most significantly, Victoria noted, "We're seeing a cultural shift in how issues are reported and addressed. In the past quarter, we've had 73 instances of staff intervening when they observed potentially biased behavior by colleagues. In each case, the intervention was professional and discreet, often preventing a situation from escalating." She paused, looking directly at Marcus. 6 months ago, no one stepped in when they should have. Today, our people are making different choices. That's the real measure of change. The board members asked thoughtful questions about sustainability, ongoing training needs, and integration with future technological updates. Marcus was impressed by the depth of engagement, the genuine commitment to maintaining momentum beyond the initial response to crisis. As the meeting neared its conclusion, the chairman of the board addressed Marcus directly. "Mr. Wright, you've heard our reports and seen our data. From your perspective, how would you evaluate our progress? Are we fulfilling the commitments we made when you agreed to proceed with this partnership?" It was a straightforward question that deserved a straightforward answer. Marcus considered his response carefully. "When I decided to sign the contract, despite what had happened," he began, "I did so with cautious optimism. I've seen many organizations make grand promises in moments of crisis, only to revert to business as usual once the pressure eases." He paused, looking around the table. "What I've observed over the past 6 months suggests that SkyGlobal is different. You've approached this transformation with seriousness of purpose and commitment to real, measurable change. You've integrated the technical and human elements in ways that reinforce each other. Most importantly, you've created accountability structures that don't depend on the continued attention of leadership to function. Marcus leaned forward slightly, his expression earnest. The true test of change isn't what happens in the spotlight when everyone is watching. It's what happens in ordinary moments, when no one of consequence seems to be paying attention. Based on what I've seen and experienced as a passenger on your airline in recent months, you're passing that test. Not perfectly. No organization is perfect, but genuinely and consistently. The chairman nodded, clearly pleased with the assessment. Thank you, Mr. Wright. That means a great deal coming from you given your unique perspective on this journey. As the meeting concluded and attendees began to gather their materials, Elizabeth approached Marcus privately. There's something else I wanted to share with you, she said, her voice lowered. David Ramirez has completed his retraining and probationary period. His supervisors have recommended reinstatement to purser status. Marcus raised an eyebrow. That seems rather quick. It would be, Elizabeth agreed, except for one factor. He's become one of our most effective advocates for the new cultural standards. He speaks to every training class about his experience on Flight 247, not making excuses, but taking full responsibility for his failure to intervene. His testimony is powerful, precisely because he's honest about his mistakes. Marcus considered this. Redemption is possible when there's genuine accountability, he said finally. If he's earned his way back through demonstrated change, I have no objection. Elizabeth smiled. That's what I hoped you'd say. We're trying to build a culture where mistakes, even serious ones, can be learning opportunities rather than career enders, provided there's real ownership and growth. And Rebecca Thompson, Marcus asked. Have you had any contact with her? Elizabeth shook her head. No direct contact. We've heard she's working outside the industry now. I hope she's found her way to some similar insights, but that's her journey to make. Marcus nodded. His concern had never been about punishing Rebecca, but about addressing the conditions that had allowed her behavior to flourish unchecked. The fact that SkyGlobal was now focusing on redemption and growth rather than mere punishment was a positive sign of the cultural shift underway. As he prepared to leave, Marcus was approached by several board members who expressed their personal appreciation for his partnership and perspective. There was a genuineness to their interactions that felt markedly different from the corporate pleasantries he had experienced in the past. The final person to speak with him was James Wilson, the executive VP who had been his first point of contact during the crisis. I owe you a personal thank you, James said, his expression sincere. 6 months ago, I thought my career was over when you called to postpone the signing. Now I'm leading the most successful transformation in our company's history. You earned it, Marcus replied. Your response was immediate and substantive. You understood what was at stake beyond just the contract. James nodded. It changed how I see my role. I used to think my job was managing systems and processes. Now I understand that it's really about creating the conditions where every person can be treated with dignity and respect, whether they're an employee or a passenger. It was a fitting summary of the journey both companies had undertaken, a recognition that technical excellence and human values were inseparable, that how people were treated was as important as what systems they used. As Marcus left the SkyGlobal building and stepped into the bright spring day, he felt a sense of closure. The incident on Flight 247 would always be a part of his story, a reminder of both the persistent reality of prejudice and the possibility of meaningful change when that reality was confronted with clarity and courage. But it was no longer an open wound. It had evolved into something more constructive, a catalyst for transformation, a testament to the power of accountability, and a reminder that even painful experiences could lead to positive outcomes when channeled with wisdom and purpose. He hailed a taxi and gave the driver the address of his next meeting. As the car pulled away from the curb, Marcus took one last look at the SkyGlobal headquarters, its glass facade gleaming in the sunlight. What had happened there mattered not just for him personally, but for thousands of employees and millions of passengers who would never know the full story, but would benefit from its legacy. It was enough. More than enough. 1 year after the incident on Flight 247, Marcus Wright found himself once again in Seat 2A on a SkyGlobal flight from New York to London. It was a deliberate choice, a personal test of how much had really changed beyond the metrics and reports he had been receiving. The experience was transformative. From check-in to landing, every interaction was characterized by professionalism, respect, and consistency. There were no scrutinizing glances, no double-checking of credentials, no subtle signals of not belonging. Just seamless, dignified service delivered with genuine warmth. His flight attendant, a young woman named Alicia Williams, provided attentive care without hovering anticipated needs, without presuming, and treated every passenger in the cabin with identical courtesy. When Marcus mentioned that he appreciated her service approach, she smiled. "Thank you, Mr. Wright. We all go through extensive training now on creating a consistent experience for every passenger. It's actually made the job more rewarding, focusing on the person rather than the preconceptions." She didn't know who he was beyond his name. On the manifest, had no idea of his role in the changes she was describing. That was the most powerful validation of all, that the transformation had taken root deeply enough to be reflected in ordinary interactions, not just special treatment for a VIP. The purser on the flight was a familiar face, David Ramirez, restored to his former position, but clearly a changed man. He recognized Marcus immediately, his expression registering surprise, followed by composed professionalism. "Mr. Wright, welcome aboard," he said, his tone respectful without being obsequious. "It's good to see you again." "Thank you, David," Marcus replied. "I understand you've been doing important work with the training program." David nodded, a hint of emotion crossing his face. "It's been a journey of learning and growth. What happened on our previous flight together changed my understanding of my responsibilities. I'm grateful for the chance to do better." It was a brief exchange, but a meaningful one. Two men acknowledging a difficult shared history and the positive changes that had emerged from it. Project Eagle had revolutionized SkyGlobal's operations as promised. The predictive maintenance module had reduced unexpected mechanical delays by 58%, exceeding even the ambitious projections. The dynamic crew scheduling system had improved on-time performance by 22%, while simultaneously reducing staff overtime costs by 17%. The customer experience platform had increased repeat bookings by 31% and positive reviews by 44%. But the true measure of success wasn't in these metrics, impressive as they were. It was in the thousands of daily interactions between staff and passengers, in the consistency of respect and dignity that had become the new standard. The technical transformation had made the airline more efficient. The cultural transformation had made it more human. As for Rebecca Thompson, she had finally found her way to a measure of peace. After a year of struggle and self-recrimination, she had begun volunteering at a community center in a predominantly black neighborhood, teaching English to recent immigrants. It was her way of making amends, not through grand gestures or public contrition, but through quiet service to those she had once judged so harshly. She would never return to the airline industry, and she would never meet Marcus Wright again. But she had found a path forward, one that acknowledged her past failures while refusing to be defined by them. It wasn't redemption in any dramatic sense, just the slow, steady work of becoming a better person. Dr. Emily Parker's case study on Flight 247 became required reading in business schools across the country, a powerful illustration of how individual bias could escalate into institutional crisis, and how thoughtful leadership could transform that crisis into opportunity. She continued to consult with airlines and other service industries, bringing academic rigor to the work of cultural transformation. For Horizon Systems, the partnership with SkyGlobal became a model for future engagements, a reminder that technical excellence must be matched by human values, that how people treat each other is as important as what systems they use. The SkyGlobal standard became a core part of their partner vetting process, ensuring that future collaborations would be built on shared commitments to dignity and respect. And for Marcus Wright personally, The experience had deepened his understanding of his role not just as a CEO, but as a leader with the power to effect meaningful change. He had used his position not for personal vengeance, but for institutional transformation, creating ripples of impact that would benefit countless others who lacked his platform and influence. 18 months after the incident on Flight 247, SkyGlobal Airways invited Marcus Wright to be the keynote speaker at their annual leadership conference. The theme was Transformation Through Accountability, and the audience included executives, managers, and frontline leaders from across the organization. As Marcus took the stage, he was greeted with genuine respect, rather than the nervous deference that might have characterized the reception a year earlier. These were not people afraid of his power to withhold a contract. They were colleagues who valued his perspective on a shared journey of change. When I was invited to speak today, Marcus began. I was asked to address how leadership responds to moments of crisis. But I'd like to focus instead on what happens after the crisis, the long, unglamorous work of building lasting change. He paced the stage thoughtfully, making eye contact with audience members as he continued. 18 months ago, something happened that brought our organizations together in an unexpected way. What could have been the end of our relationship became instead the beginning of a deeper partnership, not just in technology, but in values and vision. Without revealing the specific details of the incident, which remained confidential by mutual agreement, Marcus outlined the transformation he had witnessed at SkyGlobal. You've done something remarkable, he told them. You've integrated technical excellence with human dignity. You've created systems that support your people in doing the right thing consistently and confidently. You've built accountability structures that don't depend on crisis or external pressure to function. He shared data points from Project Eagle's implementation, the 37% reduction in delays, the 42% decrease in baggage handling errors, the 28% improvement in crew scheduling efficiency. But he emphasized that the most important metrics were the human ones, the consistent treatment of all passengers, regardless of appearance or background, the willingness of staff to speak up when they observed concerning behavior, the cultural shift from fear to empowerment. These changes matter not just for your business performance, though. That has certainly improved, Marcus noted. They matter because they reflect a fundamental truth that how we treat each other is as important as what we accomplish together. He concluded his address with a challenge that resonated throughout the hall. The work you've begun will never be completely finished. Cultures require constant tending like gardens that can always revert to wilderness without care and attention. But what you've built here, the integration of technical systems and human values, the commitment to seeing people as individuals rather than categories, the courage to speak up when something isn't right, these are lasting contributions, not just to your company, but to the broader conversation about what business can and should be in the 21st century. The standing ovation that followed was genuine and sustained. As Marcus left the stage, he was approached by David Ramirez, now promoted to Senior Training Manager for SkyGlobal's new Flight Attendant Orientation Program. Thank you for that perspective, Mr. Wright, David said, extending his hand. Your emphasis on the ongoing nature of the work is something we try to instill in every new hire. This isn't a box we check and move on from. It's a daily practice. Marcus shook his hand warmly. You're living proof that accountability can lead to growth rather than just punishment. That's a powerful message. Have you ever wondered what happens when someone decides to stand against injustice with dignity rather than rage? When accountability replaces denial and transformation follows confrontation. The story of Flight 247 offers powerful answers to these questions. It reminds us that change rarely comes from comfort. It emerges from moments that force us to confront uncomfortable truths about ourselves and our institutions. Marcus Wright could have responded to Rebecca Thompson's discrimination in many ways. He could have erupted in justified anger. He could have dismissed it as just another tax paid for success while black in America. He could have filed a complaint that disappeared into corporate bureaucracy. Instead, he chose a different path, one that recognized his unique position to demand not just personal redress, but institutional accountability. He used his leverage not for revenge, but for reform. And in doing so, He created ripples of change that touched thousands of lives. This is the nature of moral courage. Its impact cannot be contained or predicted. When we choose to stand for what's right, especially from positions of influence, we create possibilities that extend far beyond our immediate circumstances. So what does this mean for you? It's an invitation to reflection and action. To consider how you respond when you witness injustice, whether with silence or solidarity. To examine the assumptions that shape your perceptions of who belongs in which spaces. To recognize your own power, whatever its scope, to create change in your corner of the world. The choices we make in those moments matter not just for ourselves, but for everyone whose lives we touch. They shape not only what happens today, but what becomes possible tomorrow. If this story resonated with you, please take a moment to like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear its message. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories of transformation and justice in action. And let us know in the comments. Have you ever witnessed or experienced a moment like this? How did you respond, and what did you learn? Remember, true change isn't just about grand gestures or viral moments. It's about the everyday choices we make to stand for dignity, respect, and accountability. Join us in creating a world where everyone belongs, not because of their status or appearance, but because of their inherent human worth.